I, 32F, wasn't invited to either of my parents' weddings. They both got remarried in the same month. Can you believe it? I've been living out of state for work and don't check social media much, so I had no idea my parents were even engaged. Apparently, the weddings were small, family-only affairs, but I guess I'm not considered family anymore. When I called my grandparents, they were just as shocked as I was. They hadn't known about the weddings either. I reached out to other family members, and they told me they'd received invitations just a few days before the weddings. When they asked why I wasn't there, my parents told them I was too busy with work to come on such short notice. Sure, I'm often busy with work, but I would have absolutely made time for something this important. My mom got married to her boyfriend of 4 years at the beginning of last month, and my dad tied the knot with his girlfriend of 2 years just last week. I first found out about my mom's wedding when she posted a couple of photos on social media. I was completely blindsided and immediately tried to contact her, but she didn't respond for almost 5 days. When she finally did, her excuse was that they had intended to keep it really private and got so caught up in shortlisting guests that they forgot about me. Can you believe that? How do you forget your only child? I was still reeling from that when I saw photos of my dad's wedding pop up on social media. It felt like a second punch to the gut. I contacted him the day after I saw the photos, absolutely furious. But he just laughed it off and said, "You can't blame me and your stepmom for wanting to start fresh. Who wants their past mistakes at their wedding when they're embarking on a new journey? Absolutely nobody, that's who." He went on to say he didn't know why my mother hadn't invited me, but he knew exactly why he hadn't. He claimed he hadn't forgotten about me, but when they were sending out invitations a couple of days before the wedding, he decided against inviting me because he didn't want anyone from his past at this wedding. I was stunned. Past mistake? Is that all I am to him? A reminder of a failed marriage? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like they were both competing for the Worst Parent of the Year award. I decided to cut off contact with both of them. But just cutting them off didn't feel like enough. I needed to talk to someone who would understand, so I reached out to my grandparents again to let them know what had been happening. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I'm not great at keeping in touch. Ever since I moved away for work, I haven't been the best at staying connected with my family. My job keeps me incredibly busy, and I often struggle to find time for personal calls or visits. I guess that's why no one thought to contact me when I didn't show up at the weddings or when they received their last-minute invitations. That's on me, I know. Despite my lack of communication, I always thought my family would have my back. Maybe not my parents, given recent events, but definitely my grandparents. They've always been closer to me than my parents. When I was little and my parents were constantly fighting, I'd often escape to my grandparents' houses. It didn't matter whether it was my paternal or maternal grandparents, they both lived nearby and were always ready to provide a safe haven. When my parents decided to get divorced when I was around 10, I lived with my dad's parents for the entire duration of the messy, drawn-out process. My mom's parents would visit frequently too, probably more often than my actual parents did. After the divorce was finalized and my parents got shared custody, I officially moved back in with them, splitting my time between their homes. But unofficially? I still spent more time at my grandparents' places. They were my rocks, my safe spaces in the storm of my parents' drama. Even when I left for college, it was my grandparents who kept in touch more than my parents did. They were the ones who were there for me, checking in and making sure I was okay. But as I got older and more involved in my career, I started to let those connections slip. I got too caught up in my own life and started talking to them less frequently. It's something I regret now, especially in light of recent events. So when I called my grandparents, all of them, and told them what was going on with my parents and what they had said to me about the weddings, they were furious. They thought it was completely unacceptable behavior from my parents. What's more, they were angry that they had been lied to as well. Remember how my parents told everyone I was too busy to attend? My grandparents hadn't questioned it at the time because they knew how demanding my job could be. But now that they knew the truth, they were livid. They told me they would take care of the situation. I wasn't sure what they meant by that, but they sounded determined. And to be honest, I was satisfied with that. I was still too hurt and angry to deal with my parents directly, so knowing my grandparents were in my corner was a comfort. But here's where things took an unexpected turn. A couple of days after I talked to my grandparents, I started receiving a barrage of calls and messages from both of my parents. They were frantically telling me to take back whatever I had said to my grandparents because they were really upset and threatening to sue them. This confused me. Sue them for what? They couldn't sue over not inviting me to the wedding. It was hurtful, sure, but not illegal. I couldn't figure out what was going on until my mom sent me a long, panicked message explaining everything. And let me tell you, it was a doozy. Apparently, both of my parents had borrowed a huge amount of money from their respective parents to pay for my college fund. Now, I went to a pretty nice college, which means it wasn't cheap. But it was totally worth it, and I don't regret asking my parents to pay for it in the slightest. Let's face it, they weren't there for me emotionally growing up, so the least they could do was be there for me financially. If they hadn't offered to pay, I would have just arranged for student loans myself. But when I got accepted into this good college, they were the ones who offered to pay for it. Looking back, it was probably out of guilt for how they'd treated me growing up. I just took them up on the offer because I didn't care about their reasons, I just cared about not having to worry about tuition. What I didn't know was that after making that promise, they realized they weren't willing, or maybe able, to spend that kind of money. So they went to my grandparents, who readily agreed to help when they found out it was for my education. But here's the kicker, my grandparents made my parents sign paperwork saying they would pay back the money they had borrowed to fund my college education. And get this, the amount they borrowed was much bigger than just what was required to pay for my tuition. From what my mom's panicked message said, the amount my parents owe my grandparents is so high that they might end up on the streets if they had to return it all at once. Now that it's clear my parents couldn't care less about me, my grandparents feel less inclined to care about their own children. They still have the legal documents, and they're demanding that my parents return all that money. My grandparents say they want to splurge during their retirement, and honestly? Good for them. This is why my parents are now going crazy trying to get me to talk to my grandparents and fix this situation. They don't know any other way out of it, and I think they believe that because I'm the one who created this problem by telling my grandparents about the wedding snub, I should be the one to solve it. But you know what? I have absolutely no interest in solving this problem for them. And I told them exactly that. I'm not the one who created this problem, they are. Let's recap, shall we? First, they never spent any real time with me growing up and never gave me the kind of emotional support I deserved. Then, they made promises about my college education that they couldn't live up to, so they had to rely on my grandparents to fund it. If they knew they couldn't afford it, they should have just told me, and I would have arranged the money myself through student loans. The only reason they even bothered to borrow the money was because they wanted the credit for paying for me to go to college. And they got it, too. For years, I was really thankful to my parents for doing this for me. I would back them up when they would brag about it in front of our family, only to find out now that it wasn't really them at all. Even then, my grandparents had the decency to keep quiet about who had actually coughed up the money. Also, let's not forget that they probably borrowed more money than they needed to. Otherwise, they certainly wouldn't have racked up such a massive debt. And last but certainly not least, they decided not to invite me to their weddings. Which was incredibly hurtful on its own, but then they had the audacity to lie about why I wasn't attending. They made it seem like I was too busy to attend a wedding when in reality, I hadn't even been invited. It was a huge insult because it made me realize that their relationship with me was purely for show. They didn't have any actual love or affection for me, they only wanted to seem like they were good parents in front of the world. But in reality? They didn't want me at all. And even though I probably should have known this from the beginning, it still came as a huge shock. I guess I'd been in denial all these years, holding on to the hope that deep down, they cared. But I'm not in denial anymore. So I told my parents that I wasn't going to fix anything. I told them that whatever my grandparents were doing, I thought it was the right thing to do. They made their bed, and now they can lie in it. They can forget about counting on me for help. Then I blocked them. I recently told a few of my friends about all of this, and some of them think I'm being a bit entitled. They say I should try to help my parents out of this financial mess, regardless of how they've treated me. But I don't think they understand the full scope of what I've been through. So, Reddit, what do you think? Am I the asshole for complaining to my grandparents about my parents not inviting me to their respective weddings, even though it led to this financial crisis for my parents? Should I be trying to help them out of this mess, or am I right to let them face the consequences of their actions? I'm torn between feeling justified in my anger and wondering if I've taken things too far. Part of me feels like this is karma finally catching up to my parents, but another part feels guilty for potentially ruining their lives. I could use some outside perspective on this whole situation. Update 1. It's been a few days since my last post, and I want to thank everyone for their advice and support. A lot has happened, so I thought I'd give you all an update on the situation with my parents and grandparents. First off, I found out that my grandparents have decided to go ahead with suing my parents. I'll admit, I was a bit hesitant about this at first. It seemed like such a drastic step, and part of me worried it might permanently destroy what little was left of our family. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I fully support their decision. My parents didn't just betray me by excluding me from their weddings. They've been lying to and taking advantage of my grandparents for years. They borrowed money under false pretenses, took more than they needed, and then never made any effort to pay it back. And let's not forget, they did all this while pretending they were the ones funding my education. It's not just about the money, it's about the years of deception and ingratitude. Speaking of my parents, they've been blowing up my phone nonstop since they found out about the potential lawsuit. At first, I ignored their calls and messages, still too hurt and angry to deal with them. But eventually, I decided to read through some of their texts, and let me tell you, it was a wild ride. They're absolutely panicking. Both of them are sending me long, rambling messages begging me to intervene with my grandparents. My mom's texts are full of guilt-tripping statements like, "How could you do this to us? We're your parents, and don't you care about what happens to us?" My dad, on the other hand, has switched from his previous dismissive attitude to one of desperate pleading. He's saying things like, "We made a mistake, but does that mean we deserve to lose everything?" The irony of them suddenly caring about my opinion and wanting my help is not lost on me. It's amazing how quickly they've gone from treating me like a past mistake to acting like I'm their only hope. I've been giving a lot of thought to how I want to handle this situation. A small part of me, the part that still yearns for their approval and love, is tempted to step in and try to mediate. But every time I consider it, I remember all the years of emotional neglect, the lies, and the recent wedding snubs. Why should I go out of my way to help them when they've never done the same for me? So, I've made a decision. I'm not going to intervene on their behalf. I sent them both the same message: I'm not the one who created this problem. You did. Whatever my grandparents are doing, I think it's the right thing. You'll have to deal with the consequences of your actions on your own. After sending that, I blocked their numbers again. It felt liberating, like I was finally standing up for myself after years of putting their feelings before my own. Now, about the legal side of things. I've been doing some research into the situation, trying to understand exactly what my grandparents' options are. From what I can gather, since they have legal documents proving the loan and the agreement to pay it back, they have a pretty strong case. I'm not a lawyer, but it seems like my grandparents could potentially force my parents to sell assets or garnish their wages to repay the debt. It's a serious situation, and I can understand why my parents are panicking. But at the same time, they've had years to start paying this money back and chose not to. They made their choices, and now they have to face the consequences. I've been in touch with my grandparents throughout all of this. They've been incredibly supportive and have repeatedly told me that none of this is my fault. They said they had been considering taking action for a while, but hearing about how my parents treated me with the wedding situation was the last straw. My grandmother said something that really stuck with me. She said, "We gave them that money because we thought it would help bring the family closer together. We wanted to invest in your future and hoped it would inspire your parents to be better. Instead, they used our generosity to drive us all further apart. It's time they learned that actions have consequences." Hearing her say that made me realize just how much my grandparents have always been there for me, even when my parents weren't. It's made me determined to strengthen my relationship with them moving forward. I know some people might think I'm being harsh or that family is family no matter what. But I've come to realize that true family is about more than just blood relations. It's about love, respect, and being there for each other. My grandparents have shown me what that really means, while my parents have repeatedly shown me the opposite. This whole situation has made me do a lot of thinking about my own life and relationships. I've realized that I've been so focused on my career that I've let a lot of important connections slide. I'm going to make more of an effort to stay in touch with my grandparents and other family members who have been supportive. I'm also considering going to therapy to work through some of the emotional baggage from my childhood. This situation has brought up a lot of old hurts and resentments, and I think it might be helpful to talk to a professional about it all. As for what happens next, I'm not sure. The ball is in my grandparents' court now, and I'll support whatever decision they make. If it goes to court, I've told them I'm willing to testify if needed about the college fund situation and how my parents have treated me. I know this update might make me sound cold or uncaring towards my parents, but the truth is, I'm just tired. Tired of the lies, tired of the manipulation, tired of always being an afterthought in their lives until they need something from me. It's time for me to prioritize my own well-being and the relationships that actually add value to my life. Thank you all again for your support and advice. It's been incredibly helpful to have an outside perspective on all of this. I'll keep you updated if anything major happens, but for now, I'm focusing on healing and moving forward with my life. Does anyone have experience with family legal disputes like this? Or any advice on how to maintain boundaries with difficult parents? I'm still navigating all of this and could use any insights you might have. Update 2. Hey everyone, it's been a while since my last update, and a lot has happened. I'm currently at my grandparents' house. It's my first visit home in about 5 months. Being here has made me realize just how much I've been neglecting my personal life while focusing on my career. I've decided to make some changes, starting with visiting home every other weekend from now on. First things first, I've had some in-depth conversations with my grandparents about the whole situation. We sat down and went through everything, and I have to say, learning the details of what's been going on has been eye-opening, to say the least. I fully support their decision to go ahead with the lawsuit. After seeing the documentation they have and hearing the full story, it's clear that what my parents did wasn't just morally wrong, it was fraudulent. The amount they borrowed was significantly more than what was needed for my college tuition. My grandparents showed me the loan agreements and the college financial statements, and the discrepancy is shocking. My grandfather explained, "We wanted to help you get the best education possible, so when your parents came to us saying they needed help with your tuition, we didn't hesitate. We even offered more than they initially asked for, just in case there were additional expenses. We never imagined they would abuse our trust like this." It turns out my parents had been giving my grandparents inflated figures for my college expenses for years. They claimed things like additional mandatory fees, special program costs, and even required international trips that never existed. My grandparents, wanting to ensure I had every opportunity, never questioned these costs. They trusted their children and wanted to support their grandchild's education. My grandmother added, "We're not doing this out of spite. We're doing this because actions have consequences, and it's time they learned that. We've worked hard all our lives, and this money was meant to be our retirement fund and your inheritance someday. We can't just let it go." We also talked about the wedding situation again. They confirmed that everyone at both weddings had been told I was too busy with work to attend. My grandparents said they had initially thought about reaching out to me directly when they got the last-minute invitations, but they hesitated because they knew how demanding my job could be. They didn't want to make me feel guilty if I really couldn't make it. Hearing all of this has really driven home how much my grandparents care about me, and how much I've been taking them for granted. I've been so focused on my career that I've neglected these important relationships. It's made me reevaluate my priorities. I've decided to make some changes in my life. As I mentioned, I'm going to start visiting home every other weekend. I want to rebuild and strengthen my relationships with my grandparents and other family members who have always been there for me. I've also decided to start therapy to work through some of the emotional baggage from my childhood and this current situation. My grandmother was thrilled when I told her about my plans to visit more often. She said, "We've missed you so much, sweetheart. Your grandfather and I have always been so proud of your hard work, but we've worried that you might be pushing yourself too hard. We're here for you, always. As for my parents, I haven't heard from them directly since my last update. I'm guessing they don't know I'm in town, and honestly, I hope it stays that way for now. I'm not ready to deal with them face to face yet. However, I did learn some interesting information from my aunt, my mom's sister. Apparently, my parents' new spouses had no idea about the debt or the fact that my grandparents had paid for my college education. When the truth came out, it caused a lot of tension in both of their new marriages. My aunt overheard a heated argument between my mom and her new husband, where he was questioning what other financial secrets she might be keeping. Part of me feels a twinge of guilt about the strain this is putting on their new relationships, but then I remind myself that this is a consequence of their own actions. They chose to lie and deceive, not just me and my grandparents, but their new partners as well. If their marriages are struggling now, it's because of the foundation of dishonesty they built them on. Being home has also made me realize how much I've missed this place and the people here. I've reconnected with some old friends, and it's been great to catch up. They've been really supportive when I've explained the situation to them. One of my childhood friends, who's now a lawyer, even offered to look over the documents for my grandparents, just to give a second opinion. This whole experience has been a real wake-up call for me. I've been so focused on climbing the corporate ladder that I've let my personal life fall by the wayside. I'm determined to change that now. I want to build stronger, more meaningful relationships with the people who truly care about me. I'm also thinking about my future in a different way now. I've always been career-driven, but now I'm wondering if there might be opportunities for me to move closer to home, or at least find a job that allows for more work-life balance. It's something I'm going to explore in the coming months. As for the legal situation, things are progressing. My grandparents' lawyer believes they have a very strong case, given the documentation and the clear breach of contract. He's advised them that they could potentially force my parents to sell assets or have their wages garnished to repay the debt. I know this is going to be a difficult process for everyone involved, but I truly believe it's necessary. My parents need to face the consequences of their actions, and my grandparents deserve to have their retirement funds returned to them. I'm bracing myself for the possibility that this might get ugly. There's a chance my parents might try to paint themselves as victims, or even try to turn other family members against my grandparents and me. But I'm prepared for that. I know the truth, and I'm not going to let them manipulate the situation any further. This visit home has reinforced my decision to support my grandparents through this. Seeing how hurt and betrayed they feel, but also how determined they are to stand up for what's right, has only strengthened my resolve. I'm heading back to my place in a couple of days, but with my new resolution to visit every other weekend, it won't be long before I'm back. I'm actually looking forward to my next visit, which is a feeling I haven't had in a long time. Thank you all again for your support and advice throughout this ordeal. It's been incredibly helpful to have this community to turn to. I'll keep you updated on any major developments. Has anyone else gone through a similar experience of rebuilding family relationships after a major breach of trust? Or does anyone have advice on maintaining a better work-life balance? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences as I navigate this new chapter in my life. Update 3. Well, Reddit, I didn't expect to be back so soon with another update, but here we are. Things have taken an unexpected turn, and I feel like I need to share what's happened. First off, the confrontation I've been dreading finally happened. My parents somehow found out I was in town, probably through some other relatives, and they couldn't pass up the opportunity to confront me directly. They actually called for a family meeting using a burner number since they've been blocked by everyone. We decided to agree to it because, well, what harm could it do? So, we had this family meeting. Instead of apologizing and trying to make things right, they started whining about how horribly everyone was treating them. According to them, this whole situation is completely unwarranted, and all they wanted was to start a new life. They claimed the only reason they hadn't invited me to their weddings was because they both had the same mindset that me being there would only remind them of the past. It would remind them how they had failed me and had failed at being good partners to each other as well. I didn't even want to argue with that nonsense. So I just ignored it and decided to focus on the real issue. I asked them point blank why they had offered to pay for my college education and then taken all the money from my grandparents instead. And even then, they would have had to return the money at some point, so why exactly were they surprised now? They had signed the contract of their own volition, and they had also decided to steal from my grandparents under the guise of paying for my college tuition. My grandparents had just been smart enough to know that something like this was coming, which is why they had taken precautionary measures like the paperwork. At that point, my parents had nothing to say. They just started screaming and shouting senselessly. My grandparents eventually had to push them out of the house, saying that they had decided to give this family meeting a try, but it was obviously futile. The next time they meet, it will be in court. After my parents left, I spent the rest of the evening with my grandparents. We talked about everything that had happened and about my plans to come back home every other weekend. They were really happy about it, and honestly, so am I. It feels good to be reconnecting with the people who have always been there for me. Now, about the legal proceedings. Things are moving forward. My grandparents' lawyer has filed the lawsuit, and my parents have been officially served with the papers. From what I understand, they have a limited time to respond, either by trying to settle out of court or by preparing their defense for a trial. The lawyer seems confident about our case. He says that with the documented loan agreement, the proof of the money transfer, and the clear lack of repayment, it's a pretty straightforward case. He's also mentioned that my testimony about the college fund situation could be valuable if it goes to trial. I have to admit, the thought of potentially having to testify in court is a bit daunting. But I'm ready to do it if necessary. I feel like I owe it to my grandparents to tell the truth and help them get justice. One interesting development is that my parents' new spouses have reached out to my grandparents separately. Apparently, they're both shocked by the extent of the deception and are trying to distance themselves from the situation. My dad's new wife even hinted that she's considering leaving him over this. As for my own future, I've been doing a lot of thinking. This whole situation has really made me reevaluate my priorities. I've realized that while my career is important to me, it's not worth sacrificing my relationships and my peace of mind. I've started looking into job opportunities closer to home. It's still early days, but I've found a few promising leads. I'm also considering talking to my current employer about the possibility of working remotely part of the time. I've also started therapy, as I mentioned I was planning to do. It's only been a couple of sessions, but I already feel like it's helping me process everything that's happened. My therapist has been really helpful in giving me strategies to deal with the stress and anxiety that come with this situation. My grandparents have been amazing through all of this. They keep reassuring me that none of this is my fault and that they're proud of me for standing up for myself. My grandmother said something the other day that really stuck with me. She said, "Sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into. We chose you, sweetheart, and will always choose you." Looking ahead, I'm cautiously optimistic. Yes, there's still a legal battle to get through, and I'm sure there will be more drama with my parents. But I feel like I'm on the right path now. I'm rebuilding my relationship with my grandparents and other supportive family members. I'm working on my own mental health and well-being. And I'm making decisions based on what's best for me, not out of a misplaced sense of obligation to people who have repeatedly let me down. I want to thank all of you again for your support and advice throughout this ordeal. Your comments and messages have been a source of strength and clarity for me. It's been incredibly helpful to have this community to turn to. I'll keep you updated on any major developments with the legal case or any other significant changes. For now, I'm focusing on healing, on strengthening the positive relationships in my life, and on building a future that makes me happy. Thank you all again. Your support means more than you know.